security and defense policy. The report from Mr. Gahrler, the report from Mr. McALLISTER, and the declaration from the Vice President of the Commission and High Representative. We'll start with Mr. McALLISTER, the rapporteur. You have the floor for 4 minutes.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear Federica Mogherini, in your global strategy of June 2016, you defined the times we live in today as, quote, the times of predictable unpredictability, unquote, and I believe that you were and you are right in your analysis. The different situations we are facing in our eastern neighborhood, in our southern neighborhood, in the Middle East, in large parts of Africa, in North Korea, or how we will be able to convince ourselves at tomorrow's Sakharov Prize ceremony in Latin America, as well as our challenging relations with Russia and China, are all emerging as a huge political challenge for our Union and our member states. With this annual report on common security and defence policy, we try to identify the major issues our Union faces and outline a possible way forward. Dear colleagues, according to the last survey conducted by Eurobarometer, 65% of the Europeans are in favour of a common European foreign policy, while even 75% are in favour of a common security and defence policy. The European Union ought to deliver on the expectations of its citizens. In my report, and it's the first report I presented, I focused on the 3 C's. Firstly, coordination of an assessment of the profound threats and challenges within the EU. I believe we have to scrutinise the current political and security environment and take measures to guarantee the security of our people and our territory. This will foremost be achieved by stabilising our direct neighbourhood, such as the Western Balkans, by promoting reforms and tackling the root causes of armed conflicts. The second C, consolidation and deepening of the European project through enhanced EU capabilities. The European Union, as we all know, is the biggest market in the world, a major political and diplomatic power, the first trade partner for most of the countries and regions in the world, and the first humanitarian and development donor worldwide. I am convinced that only a coherent, coordinated action across these EU policies can harness the EU's collective force. And finally, the third C, cooperation within coalitions and with institutions delivering security. The European Union must continue to develop its strategic autonomy and to create its own capabilities to better address regional and international conflicts. In an increasingly conflict-ridden and unstable international environment, only a combination of effective multilateralism, our soft power, and our credible hard power can be capable of confronting those major security threats. A final remark. Yesterday's agreement to establish the permanent structured cooperation marked a huge step forward towards an independent and strong EU security and defence policy, and thus to a certain degree of hard power. Finally, I would like to thank my shadow rapporteurs for the good and fruitful cooperation. It was a pleasure to witness that the largest political groups in this House collaborate closely towards a stronger common foreign and security policy of our Union. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll now give the floor to the other rapporteur, Mr. Gahrler. 4 minutes as well.
Grazie Presidente. Annuncio vobis gaudium.
We have a CSDP, white smoke after 8 years, finally. It has been a demand from this Parliament for many years, and we're seeing permanent structured cooperation finally implemented by the Council. Mrs. Mogherini, you worked together with the Member States and Council for just a few months. We've been working on this since 2009, since entry into the force of the Lisbon Treaty. Mr. Danjean raised this issue and called on member states to kick off PESCO. We had support across many groups, and in 2016 we had a report on the Defence Union, and PESCO was mentioned as the cornerstone of this European Defence Union. The Defence Union is designed to ensure that we take matters into our own hand to safeguard the security of our citizens and the European Union. The Defence Union is enshrined in provisions of the Lisbon Treaty. We can work towards a common defence union, common defence policy, thanks to the Lisbon Treaty, which has been adopted by 28 governments and ratified by 28 parliaments. So we don't need a new treaty, we're just implementing the provisions adopted years ago. Let me say that the options of our EU treaty are in line with the NATO requirements and commitments. We can indeed strengthen our NATO commitments. The Commission has produced a paper on defence, and we talk about cooperation, the European Union supporting cooperation, offering incentives so that member states can work together on research, defence capabilities, ensure greater cooperation. Now, NATO is mentioned. Many member states want just one single set of forces, have just one single set of forces. So they are made available to the EU, NATO, or a coalition of the willing. The EU is looking at planning financing for EU research into defence. We have a budget line on defence and defence research. That's part of a pilot project in the 2015-2016 budget. The aim is that for the next financing period we'll have 500 million each year earmarked for defence. The thinking here is very clear. If countries cooperate on research, then they're going to do so on development and military and other issues. Let me say something now about the European Defence Initiative, the EDIDP. Money is already to be made available. Research and this initiative is to be welcomed because the Commission will ensure that member states do not ease up on joint initiatives here. National defence ministries will work together on public procurement. Now back to PESCO. Together with González Pons, in March this year, I outlined our Parliament perception of PESCO. It's more ambitious than what has been agreed here. PESCO is more than PEPCO, the permanent project coordination. I am pleased that the Council at yesterday's meeting picked up on one of our key demands, which is to look at the cost of structured cooperation and to ensure that it's paid from the EU defence general budget. I am looking forward now to Commissioner Oettinger's proposal to finance PESCO. Together with Council, we in Parliament will be required to ensure that budget requirements are met swiftly. We want to ensure that we have a user-friendly approach. Recent proposal from Commission and Council will allow a countdown to the European Defence Initiative in Union. We now need to ensure that all loose ends are tied up in an EU white paper so that we can work for our citizens and ensure a way forward to a defence union in a way that is explained clearly to our citizens. And I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Gahler. E adesso...
Thank you, Mr. Gahler. I'll now give the floor to Vice President Mogherini, who as High Representative has chosen to sit in the Council bench.
Prego, a lei la parola.
Grazie Presidente. Sa che di solito mi siedo...
Well, I know I normally sit on the Commission side, but for this debate, I think it's more institutionally correct for me to address the House from this side. So I've got at least 2 or 3 hats.
David McAllister and Michael Gahler for their great work, and the entire Parliament for an excellent, long-standing work And looking at your reports, I see first of all a very strong consensus among us on how crucial our unity has become for our European citizens and for the entire world. There is a need for the European Union as a force for peace and security. There is a need for us to be a credible and reliable power on the global scene, a rational, wise, calm one. So I'm glad that your reports also demonstrate a great ambition, the ambition to make our union even stronger so that we can take up this role at full. Because this is exactly what the situation requires. When we look at the world around us, we see not just uncertainty, not just unpredictability, but confusion, and sometimes a very dangerous one. This is why we're becoming more and more a point of reference for so many around the world, because we are reliable and our partners know where we stand. We are predictable because we are open about our interests and values. We are cooperative, and our friends know that they can always count on us. When others have put into question the United Nations and multilateralism, we have decided to invest even more strongly in them. Not only have we supported Antonio Guterres and his work for reforming the UN system, we have also worked with UN agencies all around the world, and particularly with the UNHCR and the International Organization for Migration. When we set up our own initiative for the future of Syria and the region with the Brussels process, we did it to support the Geneva talks led by the United Nations with all possible means, and in strong coordination with them. We have stood by the nuclear deal with Iran, and we are working for a peaceful solution of the crisis with North Korea. We have invested in the UN agenda for sustainable development. We have put our relationship with Africa on a more equal footing with so many joint initiatives, from our support to the G5 Sahel Joint Military Force to the European External Investment Plan. We have invested in resilience, for instance with our Eastern partners, working on our youth, on the fight against corruption, on energy sector reform, on strategic communications. And we have continued to be a force for peace and reconciliation, starting with our own region, Europe, with the Western Balkans and a credible path towards our European Union. We have become an indispensable partner for peace and reconciliation, for a more effective multilateralism, for sustainable development. And we have also become an indispensable partner and power for international security and a global security provider. In today's world, security and development go hand in hand, and so hard and soft power must also go hand in hand. Our work on security and defence is part of this broader picture. It has nothing to do with the militarisation of our union. We are not turning our union into a military alliance. But if we want to help our African partners, whose growth is hampered by insecurity, or if we want to make sure that instability abroad does not affect our own citizens, then we also need to be a credible military actor, using all our tools, including the military ones, and using them the European way, which means for peace, for development, for people's rights, wisely and in a cooperative manner. This year, our common defence has taken steps forward that seemed unthinkable just a few months ago. The GAHLER report is very ambitious, and I think these are the right times to be ambitious and daring. Today, the main building blocks of a European Union of security and defence are finally there. We can now research and develop our defence capabilities together. We can buy together to ensure that we have the capabilities we need and spending efficiently. We can act together to manage or prevent crises, to strengthen our partners, to make our citizens more secure. To get there, we have set up in just 1 year, even if this is built on many long years of parliamentary work, and not only in Parliament, but we've set up in just 1 year an impressive number of new tools and initiatives. All of them seemed impossible just a few months ago, just last year when we were holding this very same debate in this hemicycle. And we have done that while bringing our cooperation with NATO to an unprecedented level. Last year we announced 42 joint actions with NATO. We have implemented them. I was reporting about that implementation with NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg just last week. By the way, let me take this opportunity to congratulate him on the extension of his mandate to 2020. And last week, at the NATO ministerial meeting, we agreed together 32 more actions. So our NATO partners know that a stronger European Union makes NATO stronger, because our member states and NATO allies have one set of forces, as you mentioned, that can be used in different environments, different frameworks, and our organisations can only be complementary. Coming to the tools we have put in place during this year of work. First, we created the first ever command centre for our military training and advisory missions. I have the impression that the demand for our military and civilian missions can only grow in the future, and now we have the right structures to plan and command our missions. Second, with the European Commission, and here I should jump on the other side of the hemicycle, President, we have set up a European Defence Fund. For the first time ever, the European Commission is committing common resources to invest in defence, not to militarise our budget, but on the contrary, to help member states spend better on defence by spending together. Third, we have established a coordinated annual review on national defence budgets, for which a trial run has just been launched, and the first progress report is planned for November next year. And of course, the most historic step. Just yesterday, the Foreign Affairs Council activated a permanent structured cooperation on defence. This was unimaginable just a few months ago, not to mention at the beginning of my mandate, when I remember that very well. I mentioned during my hearing in your joint commissions, and many of you might remember that as well, I mentioned, I guess to a question of Danjean, that I would have worked to make it possible to use all instruments that the Lisbon Treaty gives us, and we did. We did it in the most ambitious and inclusive manner, with 25 member states from the very beginning launching PESCO together. The 25 have taken binding commitments to improving their cooperation, and the progress of these commitments will be assessed regularly. We will start with the first set of 17 projects. These are very practical programmes. They will facilitate cooperation between our armed forces, fill some gaps in our capabilities, and make our European defence spending much more efficient. I mentioned it several times. We have an investment gap across the Atlantic. The Europeans invest 50% of what the Americans invest on defence, but the output gap is much more impressive, because what we get out of our investment is 15% of what the Americans get. So here is where we can act at the European Union level to make our investments in defence more efficient. These projects span from a common military training to new technologies for protecting our critical infrastructures, to providing medical support to our operations, and I could continue. The possibilities of the permanent structured cooperation are immense, and they will be even greater if we manage to make the permanent structured cooperation work together with all our new defence tools. The member states that have launched the permanent structured cooperation have committed to fully participating in the comprehensive annual review on defence, and they will resort to the European Defence Fund whenever possible. The Defence Fund could be used to create a bonus for projects undertaken in the permanent structured cooperation framework. And the coordinated review will help us identify new fields for cooperation, so that permanent structured cooperation can step in. Obviously, these initiatives will have to be developed in coherence and using all possible synergies. But I believe that is exactly what the Lisbon Treaty had in mind when creating the, actually not double but triple-hatted High Representative, Vice President of the Commission and Head of the European Defence Agency. And this is why actually I should do my speech somewhere in between. Because I think that this work we've done this year has also an institutional value, to show that the different institutions we have can join forces in a coordinated manner towards one objective and delivering results that were considered to be impossible to achieve. Now, I must confess, in this moment, I am divided between two different personal feelings. On the one hand, I think, habemus papa, white smoke, mission accomplished, but no time to celebrate. It's true, we made it, it's historic, it's big, but at the same time, the real work is just about to begin. And I think we have to be aware that this is a new chapter in the history of the European Union. But today we have the paper, we have the ink, and we have a good story to tell. So we have work to do, and I think we have to look immediately from today, the day after the decision on the permanent structural cooperation was formally taken in the Council yesterday, we have to look immediately at the next steps. So it is not only about the permanent structural cooperation and its possibilities, the concrete projects and many more others, but it is also other fields of action that will be on our agenda in the year to come. The work on our battle groups, for instance, is not finalised yet, and I hope and I encourage Member States to be ambitious and to achieve progress in the Athena Committee by the end of this year or early 2018. And on top of that, we are also working on new proposals on how to fund together our work on security and defence. Together with NATO, we are also working to improve military mobility inside the European Union, and this project also fits very well within our defence cooperation agenda. And last but not least at all, I would like to see in the next months progress on our civilian missions and capabilities too, because security threats have changed, and this makes our civilian engagement even more important. If you think of our new mission to support the security sector reform and stabilisation in Iraq, or to our long-standing civilian commitment in the Balkans or in Eastern Europe, you all realise that these are key elements of our work on security. So the European way to security and defence lies precisely in the careful and wise mix between targeted military and civilian actions. That is what makes the European Union a unique security interlocutor and player in the world. So in 3 years of common work since I started, our European security and defence, our European Union of security and defence has advanced enormously. I would say we have achieved more in these last 3 years, in this last year, than in the previous 30 or 60 years. And it makes me proud, even as an Italian, that this happens in the year of the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome. That was part of the dreams of our founding fathers and mothers. But again, we have to look at the next 60 years. This should make us proud, and it should make us more aware of our potential and give us the energy, the determination and the hope that we will need to continue strengthening the European Union as a global player. Because, let me finish with this, I've always been convinced, and even more today, that the European Union is what we make of it. We decided to change things together in this field, and we did it. And now we are ready to work and shape our next steps towards a European Union of security and defence, and I'm sure we will continue to work together and do it also in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice President Mogherini. The floor now goes... Oh, I don't see Mr. Arthuis here in the room on behalf of the Budgets Committee. So we'll now hear from the political groups. I'll remind you that at this stage we will not be accepting any more blue cards because it's already a very long debate and time is pressing. On behalf of the EPP Group, Mr. Salafranca, 1 minute 30.
Thank you, President. High Representative, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to first of all recognise and welcome the work that's been done by the rapporteurs, Mr. Gahler and Mr. McAllister. I think that the conclusion that we can draw from both reports is that in times of uncertainty, as the High Representative was saying, no member state can alone solve the challenges that we face. This afternoon we'll be discussing the nuclear agreement with Iran, which we know that the Americans are calling into question. And so the analysis is same for the European member states and the rest of the world. Today, unilateralism, even from the most prosperous countries, is not possible. I think Mr. McAllister's recommendation in his report is correct. We have to have a clear and shared diagnosis of the challenges that we face, particularly when it comes to cyber warfare. We also have to consolidate the EU project through creating new capacities. and particularly through enhanced cooperation. And we also have to strengthen our alliances with strategic partners and NATO. As Mrs. Mogherini said, we can't rest on our laurels. There's still a great deal to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Socialist and Democrat Group, Mr. Bostinaru, 2 minutes. Victor.
Presidente, dear Madam High Representative, dear Federica, or shall I call you Mrs. Ubiquity because you have to run from one corner to another. Dear colleagues, today we are debating two of the most important reports this Parliament ever debated. The report of Mr. McALLISTER and the report of Mr. GAHLER. As the complex security challenges are becoming more and more serious in our neighbourhood and beyond, the EU remains, as you rightly mentioned recently, Madam High Representative, the most predictable, credible and humane global power necessary to the whole world. Yes, we are expected to act united and effectively inside and outside the Union to protect our citizens, to support our partners and allies, to be able to prevent and manage rapidly the external threats from conventional to hybrid warfare, cyber and terrorist attacks. Therefore, a strong cooperation in the context of the CSSP and CSDP is the best answer to this. This only will allow the EU to enhance our defence capabilities and to avoid duplications. Dear colleagues, it goes without saying that these commitments require adequate Member States and EU budget adjustments and funding. I welcome the progress made since the adoption of the EU Global Strategy on Foreign and Security Policy, including the adoption of the European Defence Fund and the legislative proposal on the European Defence Industrial Programme, as well as the notification of the activation of PESCO last November. One major victory for the Union and for our future defence and security capabilities, and I wish this to become the most inclusive and ambitious possible project of our Union. Finally, I would like to stress the importance of our transatlantic relations and our strategic and in complementarity partnership with NATO, as well as the importance of the enlargement process towards the Western Balkans for the security and the stability of the Union. So I recall the necessity of all candidate countries from the region to align themselves with the foreign and security policy of the Union, and then I encourage the opening as soon as possible of the Chapter 31 of the negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll remind you that you'll have to respect your speaking times because we're behind already. Mr. Tannock, 1 minute 30 for the ECR Group.
Mr. President, Madam High Representative, on all sides of the EU's external borders we are now faced with political and security instability. Events in Libya have seen large tracts of its territory fall into the hands of armed militias. The illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 has sparked fresh tensions with the European Union, whilst war still goes on, sadly, in the east of Ukraine. Erdogan, President of Turkey, meanwhile, presses ahead with his reorientation of Turkey in a Middle Eastern direction, seeking a dominant role in regional politics and hollowing out democratic institutions at home. Furthermore, despite continued progress and improvements in the Western Balkans, Euro-Atlanticist integration of that region still remains challenging. This is set against a wider backdrop of increased global threats such as terrorism, climate change, migratory fluxes, cyber attacks, and a less engaged and isolationist America following the election of President Trump. It's no surprise, therefore, that we see a renewed focus and demand by Member States to work together more closely at EU level in the realms of foreign, security and defence policies. The 2016 Global Strategy set out a bold vision for the EU in this regard, and the concrete examples seen this year in the form of PESCO, with now 25 out of 27 EU Member States joining, and the launch of a European Defence Fund prove that this is now a reality. Despite Brexit, it's clear that the United Kingdom, my country, understands the need and has a desire to remain fully engaged with the EU in these areas, and of course will remain a member of NATO and seeks for strong NATO CSDP cooperation. So I sincerely hope that phase 2 of the negotiations between the EU 27 and the UK will deliver such a deep and special partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radoš, for the ALDE Group. 1 minute 30.
Gospodine predsjedniče, godina 2017.
Thank you, Chair. 2017 is a year of concrete steps after many years of blocking and declarations when it comes to the development of the common foreign and security policy. These steps include setting up the European Defence Fund, preparations for common research activities, and setting up the Industrial Development Programme, as well as the formal setting up of PESCO. However, if we want to have a real strong defense union by 2025, we need to have a follow-up to these steps by converting these measures into permanent measures, by additionally increasing financial resources, which includes creating a typical classical defense budget for the EU. I especially welcome the national implementing plans, as well as regular strategic reviews for defense, which will enable these concrete steps and these new measures that we will come up to truly be effective, to be monitored, so that by 2025 we can really say that we have a real European security union.
Thank you. Mrs. LÖSING for the GUE, 1.5 minutes.
Mit 7 Meilenstiefeln.
7 steps towards an armed union, militarization for the industry and for turning back people looking to come to the EU from outside. Mr. Galler talks about it being user-friendly. Now, recently I talked about how the vested interests of the weapons industry are protected here. It is very difficult and very often we fail to secure funding for real development work. We have billions being spent on research, development and procurement of weapons. That money can be made available within 6 months. Now, there's a financing ban in the articles of the treaty. Now, Mr. McALLISTER talks about peaceful resolution, but let's face facts. There is always a disaster after military intervention. We're seeing many refugees turn back, force being used to turn them back, refugees dying at sea. Amnesty International has criticized this. PESCO is driven forward by France and Germany, and it really undermines the community principle, and I think that we are moving once and for all away from a European Union that is seen as a peace project. Happy Christmas.
Thank you. Mrs. Valero, 2.5 minutes for the Greens.
We're living in a time with new security challenges for Europe, and automatically we do need to adopt our policies to the changed situation. But the same thing, at the same time, we shouldn't be over hasty and move towards measures that contradict the treaties. And that's where we find ourselves today. Rather than taking on new tasks, we should get better at what we already do today. Look at the kind of peace interventions we have before and after conflicts, and look at how we work with development aid. We need to ensure that we are able to work properly with the EU and UN peace interventions. We are more positive towards the voluntary cooperation through PESCO, which is properly enshrined in the treaties. There are quantitative objectives for member states, but we think that that's a mistake. These objectives should be qualitative objectives to actually improving the defensive capacity. Just having 2% of GDP expenditure is not a guarantee, it's just a gift to the defense industry. Rather, we need to be smarter and more effective to get more security for our money. Otherwise, we risk of contributing to an arms race and increasing tensions in the world. So, yes, we need better defense, but we can do it effectively for our money, as Mrs. Mogherini said. We don't want to simply blow up the defense industry with expensive subsidies. We, in too many cases, sell arms to third countries with, well, rather dodgy counterparties. Now, we can make savings on military purchasing, and any savings should be reinvested so that it's easier for EU member states to cooperate in peace interventions. Increased cooperation on material is very important, particularly so that we can have more preventative and peacekeeping missions. However, we don't think defence policy should be moved to the EU. We shouldn't have an EU defence budget. We shouldn't have a defence industry programme, an EU defence ministry or an EU army. The EU should remain a project for peace. It should not become a military alliance with a responsibility for Europe's territorial integrity. Mrs. Mogherini, there is a letter sent by 4 party groups to you about an arms embargo on Saudi Arabia. That's something that this Parliament has already expressed its views on 3 times. Is anything happening? Are you taking any initiatives to try and ensure that weapons are no longer exported to Saudi Arabia? Thank you.
Philippot, prego. Mr. Philippot, 1.5 minutes for the EFDD. Colleagues, today more than ever, I'm proud to be French. Today I oppose to the European policy of common security defence policy, a step towards federalism once again. The report set out today shows how far the EU is working against the will and interests of the people. It's become clear since the Lisbon Treaty was imposed on the people of Europe, particularly it was imposed on my people. The vote against it was clear. NATO puts countries' military command under the aegis of an organisation which is not run by their people, and Europe is doing that same today. Faced with Trump, Europe has to be able to act as its member states. Yes, cooperation is helpful, but having a single force is not. What is a European force going to do? Have foreign wars? We'd need a common defence policy. We can see that there is a danger here. The Eurocrats are trying to take control of armed forces, and it's not only against foreign powers that they will turn these forces, but also against the European people. There'll be tanks from Warsaw to Rome to Paris, and people will fight to get their freedom back.
Onorevole Bay, 2 minuti e 30.
Mr. Bay, 2 minutes 30 for the ENF group.
Chers collègues,
colleagues, these 2 reports are closely linked. They deal with the common foreign and security policy and the common security and defence policy. Both reports were entrusted to rapporteurs from Mrs. Merkel's party. Hardly surprising, therefore, that there are a few untruths in there. One of the rapporteurs, for example, ventures to claim that Russia prevented resolution of the Syrian conflict. And then the next paragraph talks about a priority being consolidated, illegal, safe access to Europe for migrants. Let's be serious. Now, on the CSDP, let us recognise that most European countries are incapable of ensuring their own defence. National armies just about suffice for a few parades, a few multinational deployment missions. Mrs. Mogherini, that statement is set out in a book published last April by Nicholas Grover-Hader. You provided the preface. Now, if our armies are increasingly like paper tigers, it's because we've steadily reduced defence budgets at a time when China, Indonesia, India, Russia and the US have increased their expenditure, which is a cornerstone for any credible foreign policy. The US budget in 2016 was $664 billion, 3 times that of the EU, all member states together. In his report, Mr. Galler calls for an integrated European force. But before we have some sort of artificial superstructure, we need to cooperate efficiently. We need effective cooperation between armies that understand one another. It is only in this way that we can define shared strategic prospects. We need joint operations, varied parameters, 3, 4, 5 or more. It is only in this way that we can forge shared military culture. We need voluntary, supple cooperation. And what's the point of talking about defence, a Europe of defence, if we continue to purchase our supplies from the US? After Brexit, France will be the only member state with nuclear weapons and a seat at the UN Security Council, and also the only member state with an efficient, powerful military industry. We have major companies such as Dassault, Thales and MBDA, and also many SMEs, innovative SMEs, and we need to continue such investment if we want to get ahead of our rivals, US or Asian.
We've heard from the political groups. Now the non-attached, Mr. EPITIDEIOS, for 1 minute.
From the EU countries, only Greece and Cyprus face a real threat to their security. A threat that is coming from Turkey, that directly and officially threatens their territorial integrity. These situations means that they have to spend large amounts of money on defense. The other countries of the EU face some dangers and threats from international terrorism, organized crime and cyber attacks. However, those threats are not so heavy that they have to increase their defense spending. Neither is there a very powerful adversary that is threatening Europe. Anyway, that is a job for NATO. So, in essence, there is no reason for the EU to move ahead with its defense capabilities. If this happens, it has to do with other things, such as intervening in third states, as well as selling weapons. Finally, we should not move ahead with scrapping unanimity just because we need to overcome the objections of some countries.
Sure. Thank you. We now move on to the debate. And we can accept blue cards, but you do have to stick to speaking time, and that's for all speakers because we are very late. Mr. Danjean, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, President. Well, all too often, Madam Vice President, regretted the weakness and sluggishness of the implementation of the Lisbon Treaty in this area. So it's a pleasure to see that most of these measures have now been adopted. So I'd like to congratulate you on all of the work that you've put in, but also with an awareness there's a lot still to be done. There are a lot of statements of intent that are entirely virtuous, but the devil is in the details as to how these recommendations are to be implemented. Since the publication of the Global Strategy in 2006 through to the yesterday's publication, a lot of progress has been made indeed. It's a growing awareness that lies at the root of this among Europe's citizens that more needs to be done for Europe's security. We've heard some arguments already saying that Europe's people do not want it, but it's always the minority groups that would decide to speak on behalf of Europe's people, as if they were entitled to speak for Europe's diverse peoples. But these security measures are there precisely to satisfy our citizens. It does not undermine national sovereignty. Each country has its own military forces. It's been said again today that France is the most active military nation in Europe. It's got troops in the EU, in the NATO, and in national capacities. That does not undermine France's sovereignty, but it guarantees the sovereignty of Europe. So we need pragmatism, flexibility and effectiveness. I think from this point of view, the measures that have been taken are good ones, and we now need to make sure that they are entirely operational. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Etheridge, he has a question for Mr. Danjean. For Mr. Etheridge, will you accept it?
Okay.
Thank you, sir. I notice in your speech you speak about the Lisbon Treaty and you speak about the Union. Would it not be fair to say that this combined defence is really a united defence leading towards the United States of Europe, very much as former President Schulz outlined in his recent speech, and all this is primarily is a political project to bring the peoples of Europe together in the United States of Europe?
Prego, onorevole, la sua risposta.
Your response.
Well, dear colleague, you refer to the Lisbon Treaty. Well, did you want to see provisions in there about defence and security? The provisions in there are not very specific. They don't talk about a European army. They don't talk about an integrated army or anything like that. They're talking about compatibility with other commitments in other alliances such as NATO. That's a pragmatic solution. What you're doing is to try and put across an ideological view because that helps your propaganda. But the reality that we face before us is much more important than your ideological issues. This is a pragmatic approach.
Thank you, Mrs. Valenciano. 2 minutes, please.
Prego, Elena.
Thank you, President. I'm very happy to see Mrs. Mogherini on that seat. It reassures me to see you sitting over there. Now, in politics, of course, you have to listen to your adversaries, but Europe's adversaries are very upset with this considerable advance in our common foreign security policy. And for me, it's comforting to hear them because it shows to me that we're on the right path. I think we are on the right path, and I'd like to congratulate Mrs. Mogherini because I would imagine that this is only possible because of your efforts and your commitment. And to colleagues who don't understand Europe and being European, it's peace and security. That's the only way to ensure prosperity. We have to defend these values both inside and outside of our borders. For those who've mentioned sovereignty as a problem, there's no better way of defending sovereignty. The sovereignty of all member states and our citizens by dealing with problems together, because the problems Europe is facing don't have borders. Terrorism doesn't have a border. Problems relating to migration don't have borders. The most difficult problems we're facing doesn't have a border. Climate change. That's why we need a foreign security policy which will ensure that our values are defended throughout this globalized world. And I'm very reassured to see that we can defend this, that we can defend stability, peace, conflict, revolution, provide very direct support to our African neighbours, to Libya, Tunisia, refugees, defending human rights. And this is all within the European, pro-European spirit that we are defending here, that most representatives here are defending. And those who are fighting that, I think, will lose. Thank you, Mr. Van Orden. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm always amused by the use of opinion polls. I wonder if the people across Europe were asked, for your defence, would you prefer to rely on the EU institutions or the NATO alliance that engages the United States alongside the European nations? I wonder what they'd answer. Now, I have to say, well, it's not the question you like, absolutely. I have to say I don't agree with most of Mr. Gahler's report, but there are three phrases that I do actually agree with. The Western democracies do indeed face unprecedented threats and challenges. The United States' commitment to European security is welcome, I would say essential, and that Brexit means the European Union could lose Britain's military capability and expertise, and there is a need for a new UK-EU defence cooperation relationship. The logic of all this is to underline the need for Western solidarity and for us all to put our energies into revitalising the alliance that binds the United States and Britain to the security of Europe. It's called NATO. But instead, the European Union is creating an entirely separate European defence union, separate from NATO, but still involving most of the NATO allies. It's all about political integration and the long-standing desire of a certain member state for so-called strategic autonomy. Actually, we don't need PESCO, we don't need EDU. What we need is for all the Europeans to spend more on defence, to address crises alongside all their key allies, and have the political will to participate in military action when required. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Onorevole Van Baalen.
Thank you, Mr. Van Baalen. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. I would like to say that our common foreign and security policy should be about hard power. It should be about defending our borders and providing peace and security. That is not only by peacekeeping, it should also be by peace enforcing. And the UK should be fully integrated in that. And that's why European defence aspirations should be integrated in NATO. Of course, if it's not possible for NATO to act for whatever political reason, we should be able to act ourselves. That is also in the defence of our interests. But again, let's try to get on one line with NATO. That is the best option. If we look at security threats, I also understand that seen from Washington, D.C., a threat from Russia is different than if you look from Tallinn, from Kiev, or from Georgia, or from Moldova. That's a different way, a different angle. If we look at the situation in the Middle East, of course this is a global concern which concerns the United States as well, but it's directly on our borders. So we have a specific extra interest, and therefore we should put our money where our mouth is. We should really invest. And again, those countries who would like to be members of the European Union should also adopt our views about security and defence. I thank you very much.
Grazie. Onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Ropė. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, strengthening the common security and defence policy is indeed a praiseworthy step. Recent developments have shown that Europe has not necessarily become safer since World War II, but are we on the right track? Are we creating a new structure here that will not actually deliver an effective tool? We have NATO. Will we not actually undermine NATO and its structures through our efforts here? Will we be able to honour our commitments to NATO? I have not seen any answers to these questions. In recent years, I've seen a tendency to assume that we can solve all problems without really analysing the root causes. We want to set up some new structure quickly without really giving any thought to it.
Mr. President, at last June's UK referendum, the British people wisely voted for our independence from the European Union. Yet the British government, for a lack of intent and preparation, seems to be doing a good job in messing it up. Indeed, last week's announcement was nothing short of scandalous. Yet something that is yet to achieve detailed public scrutiny in the UK is the apparent willingness to sell out British defence and foreign policy by sticking as close as possible to EU policy. Indeed, the same could be said about the traditionally neutral EU members, Austria, Sweden and the Republic of Ireland. I have to wonder whether the political classes there are being deliberately quiet on this critical issue. The EU has nothing to contribute that cannot be better achieved via existing institutions such as NATO or, of course, through bilateral relations. It is time for the European Union to roll back its ambitions in this area. At the very least, the UK should have no further part in propagating them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs Atkinson, 1.5 minutes.
A fully fledged EU army is in the making. Brussels is aiming to have its own military apparatus backed by a joint defence budget of billions. It fits perfectly with the EU's ambition of constructing a European superstate, replacing the nation-states of Europe, as openly admitted by Verhofstadt. It's always been in the treaties. Yet you all lied to your constituents. You said it was a right-wing Eurosceptic fantasy, as did the UK's sacked Remainer, Nick Clegg. At last, we on this side of the House have been proven right. This army provides the ultimate grandeur of fully fledged statehood, as unveiled by Martin Schulz this weekend. All the taxpayers' money the EU will be spending on defence will not be going into useful capabilities. It will definitely not be used to beef up the NATO alliance. Instead, the EU will be expanding its bureaucracy with designer uniforms, shiny new buildings and headquarters. It's already got an anthem and a flag. So let's be clear, instead of President Trump undermining the credibility of NATO, is it clear that the EU undermines NATO? I was in Washington last week. Senior politicians up on Capitol Hill said to me, the army will be used to shore up your external and inner borders, right? Or clamp down on radical Islam extremism, those men raping and assaulting women and Jews, those terrorists that are blowing you up. That's what your money is going to be used for? I said no, it won't be to protect the citizens. It will be spent on vanity, sabre-rattling by Verhofstadt, Juncker and that gender quota recycled communist, the High Priestess, Mrs Mogherini. Be afraid. Yeah, I've got your attention now. Be afraid when they get their hands on the weapons.
Onorevole Korwin-Mikke.
Mr Korwin-Mikke, 1 minute, please.
Panie Przewodniczący, czytam to sprawozdanie I dowiaduję.
Thank you very much, President. Well, I've read through this report, and I've read that we are facing a hybrid war. Well, I don't know what that is. I haven't managed to find a definition of that. But I've also read that Russia is a threat to us. Well, Russia did not pursue a hybrid war in Syria. What they did was they sent aeroplanes to destroy the caliphate. But the report doesn't mention that at all. Then I have a second question. If this hybrid war is so dangerous, why don't we engage in it? Why isn't the EU planning any hybrid wars? Why not? So, basically a hybrid war does not exist. What it's a question of is public procurement. And it's all about slush money for politicians. That's the whole point of PESCO.
Thank you, President. A recent poll showed that many European citizens are ill at ease with developments around the world. 68% want Europe to do more when it comes to security and defence. Instability around the world means that the European Union needs to step up to its responsibilities and focus on defence policy. Mr McAllister and Mr Gahler's reports underscore this. We live in an international environment with much conflict, and we need action to tackle challenges. It's very important that the European Union takes a firm stance in its dealings with Russia. I welcome the adoption of PESCO and work on cooperation in the European defence industry. It will make it possible to increase the capabilities of EU member states and to improve defence. Finally, I have a question on greater commitment by member states. NATO.
Prego.
Mr. Fleckenstein, 2 minutes.
Prego, Knut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liebe Kolleginnen.
Colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank David McAllister and Michael Gahler for their loyal and productive cooperation. The McAllister report puts it in a nutshell. It's a question of a combination of effective multilateralism, joint soft power, and credible hard power. Well, that's exactly what's at stake here. The combination of soft power and hard power. I think that we can be proud of our soft power, and in future we need to continue to develop this. It's not a question of a pendulum that swings from soft power to hard power as if one was yesterday's game and the other is to be our future. No, we need both. But without hard power, it's not going to add up. And there's a lot that needs to be done. How can we work better together in the EU? How can we be more efficient through common procurement and research? And I will not allow it to stand when Mrs. LÖSING from the GUI keeps repeating the same false statements as if we were about to start some kind of arms race. And then she runs off because she's not really interested in then entering into debate with anyone. So, colleagues, we should not allow these comments to stand without contradiction. A former German foreign minister said, we can't rely on the EU alone. We have to take security in our neighborhood into our own hands. It's only fair to the US, and it seems that the US is also developing at this time from a security guarantor to a security risk. So what financial contributions will the member states make? What should be the role of the Parliament in practice? And how are we going to control and limit arms exports in future? Well, we made a good start in answering these questions. And Mrs. Mogherini, much of this is thanks to your stubbornness and your hard work. The confidence of the large, you have the confidence of the large groups in your efforts, although you will not be without criticism.
Prego, un minuto.
Mr. President.
Rada zdecydowała, że PESCO ma być inkluzywne.
Thank you. PESCO is to be ambitious. So many member states cooperating together and deliverables that can be measured. How can we achieve those targets? We need to look at the criteria and the rules to ensure that all member states are on an equal footing when it comes to influence and growth in their industries. We need a balance across the EU member states. We cannot allow PESCO to undermine NATO, and we need to ensure that there is no breach of cohesion. We need to look at mobility of armies and militarization. We need to look at the pace of decisions. They can be key for security in Central and Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Minuto 30.
Thank you, Ms. Houtmans. 1 minute 30.
Meneer de voorzitter, mevrouw Mogherini.
Thank you, President. Mrs. Mogherini, I'm really delighted that it's the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, when we've been able to make such clear progress for our common security and defence. Let's be clear, this was entirely necessary. The 28 member states have only 50% of the American budget and an output of only 15%. And we all know that if we work together, we could do more and better. In recent years, we have seen more progress than in the 30 years before that. And that, colleagues, is the result of the security challenges at our borders, but also the declarations made by President Trump and Brexit. So I welcome this cooperation. Sleeping Beauty has woken up. We have to work together, create things together. Europe has to do this to make progress, clear, concrete projects with 25 member states. But we have to be even more ambitious. Mrs. Mogherini has often said here, I have a dream. And my dream is that 10 years from now, we will have an European army rather than 27 national armies. I hope we'll be able to move in that direction. Go for it. You have our support.
Onorevole Vautmans, c'è una domanda.
Mrs. Vautmans, there's a question. Will you accept a question?
Accetta? Onorevole Carver, prego.
Mr. Carver.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Madam, for taking my question. To quote what you've just said, you said Sleeping Beauty has finally woken up. Does that not underline the military ambitions of this federal ambitions of this place? And what would you say to the citizens? My country, thankfully, is leaving the European Union. But what would you say to the citizens of Sweden, of Austria, and of the Republic of Ireland? Neutral countries, traditionally neutral countries. What would you say to them about the direction of the European Union? Thank you.
La sua risposta, prego.
Your response, please.
Laat me eerst en vooral natuurlijk antwoorden dat...
Well, clearly, I would answer that, of course, I regret the fact that the UK is leaving the EU, but I believe that the new young generation will come back to Europe 10 years from now. I firmly believe that, and I very much hope that will be the case. Secondly, on neutral countries, what I would say to these countries is quite simple. We have 25 out of 28 member states who will be able to implement projects together. Thank you.
Mr. Etheridge, please. 1 minute 30.
Thank you, sir. My family knows a little about common European defence. My nan saw Zeppelins over Tipton in the West Midlands. My great-grandfather left Lancashire to be a tunneller in the First World War. My grandfather, Herbert Etheridge, was served in a tank and helped to liberate Europe from oppression in the Second World War. We know that the UK has never ever shirked its responsibility to Europe. Whilst we may be leaving the EU, we will never shirk our responsibility to keep Europe free. We have an excellent defence alliance. It's called NATO. We work with the last remaining superpower in the world, the United States, to protect freedom in Europe and other places. Despite the fact that our treacherous United Kingdom government is deliberately and systematically running down our defences, we still do not require a union such as this. This is purely a political union to create a United States of Europe that the people of Europe were never consulted about. What I would say to you is very simple. No British government should ever commit to this. No British money should ever be spent on this. And not one single drop of British blood should ever be spilt in a cause that is not directly in the remit of the Queen and country.
Onorevole Marusik,
Mr. Marusik, for 1 minute 30.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący. Politycy bardzo chętnie mówią.
Thank you very much. Well, politicians like to say what people want to hear. The common security policy is one of those things. But we also need to bear in mind reality. Politics also means competition, political competition, dangers and conflicts are some of the major issues that politics needs to deal with. And the world environment is creating political conflicts. We're dealing with all sorts of different kinds of conflicts affecting different countries. There are new, different dangers for Greece, the Netherlands or Poland, just to take 3 countries. A common security and defence policy is just one further step towards the dissolution of national sovereignty in Europe. That is the truth about the process that we are now embarking upon. Europe states have got no say in monetary policy. There is less and less over fiscal issues. Now common security and defence policy is being taken away from them, and the member states are becoming fictitious entities. The European countries within the United States of Europe will basically remind you of Indians' reservations in the United States. That the national differences will be reduced to kitschy national dress. So the problem is that this will all explode in their face.
Σε όσες πτώσεις και αν κλείνετε τις λέξεις ειρήνη και άμυνα.
No matter how many words you say, how many times you say the words peace and defense, you cannot hide the fact that you are preparing for new imperialist wars. We have a dangerous network of a military European Union that is complementary and also independent from NATO. And you are going to evaluate how much governments are spending on defense. You will have an enhanced cooperation in the framework of PESCO and your own military headquarters with fast-moving units that will be able to be deployed wherever the capitalist forces want to. At the same time, we have a lot of danger zones, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Palestine again, and of course Turkey being very provocative. The Greek government has already given bases to the imperialist powers, which means more profits for multinationals. We should not rest within the EU and NATO and be always vigilant to protect the people. Thank you.
Onorevole Alliot-Marie, prego, 1 minuto e 30 per lei.
Mrs. Alliot-Marie, 1.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame la Haute.
Thank you, President. High Representative, I particularly welcome the fact that the different European institutions have finally realized the dangers and threats, current and future dangers that we face, and therefore the urgent need to have a security and defence policy which is strong, credible and properly structured. Today we can welcome the fact that thanks to your commitment and to the actions of our institutions, today we can set out some clear practical measures through, in particular, the 2 excellent reports on this topic. Strengthening the capacities of the Defence Union, the creation of a European Defence Force or permanent structural cooperation, and developing defence industries in Europe. But what's more important is Europe is making progress, constant progress in this direction so that it can finally provide better protection for its citizens in the future. The problem, as we heard from the Budget Committee, is that the funds for this have to be properly used. So, Madam High Representative, a question. Are you willing to come to this Parliament and provide an annual analysis of what's been done through a Commission report to the Parliament, which will allow us to follow what's actually been achieved and what hasn't been done, because, as we've seen in recent years, funds have been used for other policies as opposed to common security and defence policy?
Prego, Janusz,
Mr. Zemke.
Przedstawiciel. Co roku.
Yes, thank you very much. Every single year in this House we evaluate European foreign policy, and one of the components of that policy, of course, is security and defence policy. Fundamentally, these assessments are always very cautious and very critical. It's quite clear that the Union's resources do not correspond to the scale of the tasks and are simply not sufficient to guarantee Europe's security, especially given the ever more complex environment. So we have to accept that this is an opportunity for us to overcome this lack of action. We have got PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation, And if we are to think about what this cooperation can bring with it, I think that over the long term, what's going to be most decisive could be the work on research and implementation of new technologies. At the moment, we face two major problems. First of all, the expenditure for defence in Europe is too low, and secondly, that the money, or already insufficient money, is spent very badly. And I can illustrate this as follows. All member states of the European Union spend 40% of the amount of money that the United States spend on defence, but the efficiency of that expenditure is only 15%. So if this is supposed to be credible, genuine efforts and not just hypocrisy, then we need to break through this model. Europe needs to take its opportunity to have a defence autonomy and security autonomy. If we can achieve something together, then it would be a joint success. Thank you.
Un minuto.
Mr. Kölmel, please.
Thank you, President. Common foreign and security policy has many facets. I welcome enhanced cooperation when it comes to procurement and research. It makes perfect sense. It also makes sense for us within the EU to look at our different defence capabilities and to help each other out. Not all countries specialise in the same way, but there are limits. Looking at the current state of affairs in the EU, looking at the disagreements and conflicts, it's very difficult to see how we can talk about a common EU army. It makes no sense. Let's put paid to that idea. I think it would be dangerous because it would suggest that we have a battle capability that is simply not there. We have NATO. NATO has ensured peace and security in Europe. We should focus our efforts there and only take those steps that really make sense and take us in a sensible direction. Thank you.
Mr. Payet, 1 minute 30.
Dear colleagues, common EU action is needed to safeguard Europe's security, tackle complex challenges, protect its interests and its citizens, and to defend its values. EU defence cooperation is necessary and the timing is right for this. That's why yesterday's decision of the Council to adopt the decision establishing PESCO is of utmost importance. It gives the much needed possibility for 25 member states to work together on defence projects, to cooperate more in defence and security, invest in shared projects and to enhance the operational readiness and contribution of their armed forces. One of the most critical issues in debates about defence modernisation and Europe's common defence efforts has become cyber defence. This needs cooperation and it is good that the newly established PESCO foresees projects in the cyber defence domain. Also, common training exercises between the EU member states are vital in the area of cyber defence to build trust and understanding of possible cyber threats and challenges, as demonstrated by the training organised by the Estonian presidency. The EU needs to have a clear plan that encompasses EU-NATO cooperation on cyber defence training and exercises, the promotion of civil-military cooperation and the applicability of international law to cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pretzel, 1 minute 30.
Herr Präsident.
President, Madam Mogherini, ladies and gentlemen. In Germany, we've got a defense minister, Mrs. van der Leyen. She has put the German Bundeswehr into a situation where the submarines can't float, the airplanes don't fly, the tanks don't work. The only progress that the German army has made over the last few years is that it has started to introduce pregnancy uniforms for the female soldiers. So now we have two members of Mrs. van der Leyen's party, Mr. McAllister and Mr. Gahler. Now that is to become the European defence policy. Well, cheers to that. NATO, to date, has been entrusted with ensuring the security of Europe, and NATO has done that as a defence alliance. Not only has it defended us, but it has also intervened in third countries, and that, unfortunately, is where it's caused more problems than it's solved. Well, there's been talk of hybrid war. The answer to hybrid war is non-classical armies. That would include the reintroduction of military service in Germany. This isn't an defensive initiative. I would absolutely reject these aggressive fantasies of EU officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pretzel. The next speaker is Eleftherios Synadinos. 1 minute. Mr. Synadinos, you have the floor, please.
Chair, first of all, this common security and defense policy does not have the democratic legitimization it should, and the people that support it do not have the people's legitimization or the basic principles of the equality of peoples, as well as non-intervention in the internal affairs of other countries. However, I would like to say that military alliances have two preconditions. First of all, in the text we do not see what the EU will do if we have a clash between member states of this alliance. And second, we do not see what the EU will do for the territorial integrity of a member state if it is attacked from a third country. Unless we answer those two basic questions, I do not see a reason for which the member states should go ahead for this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Synadinos. The next speaker is Edward Kukan. 1.5 minutes. Take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciation and thanks to both distinguished rapporteurs for a very good job. I am glad that we have moved quickly over the last year on security and defence policies. Earlier this year we have launched European Defence Fund and yesterday the Permanent Structured Cooperation. To this end, I would like to welcome yesterday's Council decision on establishing PESCO and commitments given by the Member States. I would like to congratulate the High Representative for her work and dedication to this important project. Security and defence became once again the underlying issues of the EU integration project. It is clear that no single Member State can alone tackle the complex security challenges we are facing today. In order for the EU to be able to respond in internal and external challenges, we need to step up cooperation, pool our resources and focus on strategic priorities. I am aware that it will take time to reach full cooperation. However, the first projects which come out of the initiative, especially in the areas of training, capacity development and operational readiness, seems to be promising. In order to make full use of this cooperation, we will need to care about the seeds which we already planted. This would also mean establishing fully fledged EU civilian military strategic structures, support from the Union budget and trust and cooperation on the side of the Member States. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kukan. The next speaker is Pichula. 1 minute. Take the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Madam High Representative, I would like to congratulate the rapporteurs on their reports. On the basis of many initiatives taken over the past year, Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which is a common denominator of this discussion, is being enacted. At the yesterday meetings of 25 ministers from member states, we have agreed on cooperation in defence, and we have the European Defence Fund, and this exceeds expectations even of the greatest optimists of us who worked on the report on the European Defence Union. I would also like to point out the importance of further enlargement process as a guarantor of security at the eastern borders of the European Union and also within the European Union. I would also like to stress the importance of communicating these achievements. This is not a militarization of the European project or a European army. We are meeting the expectations of more than 2/3 of our citizens who set security as their priority. And we have too long duplicated our actions and also spent resources in an uncoordinated manner. We need to support initiatives that give true content to the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pichula. The next speaker is Marek Jurek. 1 minute. You have the floor.
Pani Przewodnicząca,
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's debate, we hear time and again the same thing, building up alternatives, having parallel military structures, something that would be parallel to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty. Some people seem to be afraid of this move, but let me put the following to you. These are alternative structures. Do you believe that you could replace the US in those parts of the world that are most dangerous for Europe? We've seen something entirely different in eastern Ukraine. During peace talks, the largest EU member states accepted Russia's proposals. So let's ensure solidarity first of all, and then we'll build up our instruments here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jurek. The next speaker is Francisco José Milán Mon. 1.5 minutes. Take the floor, please.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. I'd like to start by congratulating Mr. McALLISTER and Mr. Gahler on their excellent reports. We need a consistent European policy to defend our borders and to face up to the complex challenges facing the EU at the moment. PESCO is important not just for its commercial advantages and for helping with development strategy, but I think it's also the right way to go if we want to ensure that we develop our foreign policy to its full potential. As many people have said, I welcome the progress that has been made in recent months, particularly the announcement yesterday of PESCO in the Foreign Affairs Council. It will give us more capacity to respond as our citizens are asking for, and so I congratulate you, Mrs. Mogherini. One of our priorities in foreign policy is instability in the neighbourhood. NATO is also a key factor in our foreign policy, and I would say, Ms. Mogherini, it's vital to keep close links with the United States. We need stability in the Pacific region as well. We're facing a number of uncertainties and challenges such as climate change and terrorism, and the EU has to be able to provide responses to citizens' concerns and interests. We have to be a global player, demonstrate multilateralism for prosperity and security.
Thank you, Mr. Milán Mon. The next speaker is Claire Moody. You have 1 minute. Take the floor, please.
Thank you, President. These reports are very timely reflections on the progress that is being made at a European level on foreign policy, security and defence. Both the McAllister and Gahler reports highlight the effectiveness of working together at an EU level towards peace and security in our increasingly troubled world. Contrary to earlier statements by Europhobic politicians, it is in the interests of all of us that the EU strengthens its position on the world stage. I also welcome the fact that both reports are looking to achieve a defence cooperation relationship between the EU and the UK in future. I sincerely hope that this will be achieved in both the industrial sphere but also in the political decision-making sphere in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moody. And the next speaker is Madam Suica, 1.5 minutes. You have the floor. Dubravka Suica.
Thank you. At the beginning, I would like to thank the rapporteurs, Mr. Michael Gahler and Mr. McAllister, who have drafted an excellent report. And Madam Mogherini, I would like to quote you for once. As you said once, it is true that these are times of predictable unpredictabilities. We are facing great challenges, and there are many important topics ranging from the relations with Russia, China, the Eastern neighborhood, then to relations with Latin America. Yesterday we spoke about the Sakharov Prize in relation to Venezuela, then North Korea, the Crimean Peninsula, Ukraine. So we must find responses to all these challenges, and therefore I support these initiatives which were launched a couple of years ago. But let me refer to the State of the Union speech by Mr. Juncker in this Parliament, when he announced the completion of the European Defence Union, together with the European Defence Fund and with this initiative concerning PESC. By 2025, we will surely have completed the European Defence Union. I'm especially glad that the Lisbon Treaty is in force and that it has permitted this, and that this initiative is taking place at a moment when we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome. So this is a full circle that we've come. And our citizens have shown their concerns concerning their security, and we must reply to their concerns with these initiatives. So thank you again, and I support fully this initiative.
Thank you, Madam Suica. The next speaker is Madam Ulvskog, Marita Ulvskog. You have the floor. 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. Mrs. Mogherini. It's very important that there should be a decision-making capacity when there are sudden changes and new risks. We might be talking about the climate crisis, the refugee crisis, or other security policy crises. We live in a Europe with a great deal of diversity, including in the security sectors. So it's very important for our cohesion and our response capacity that there should be inter-state cooperation through PESCO. The common foreign and security policy has to be about peace and conflict prevention outside the borders of the EU. I have to say that I come from a country that has lived in peace for 200 years now. So we have a huge responsibility on our shoulders for those who have not been able to live in peace and security. This requires international cooperation. So no state should be forced into a war.
Thank you, Madam Ulvskog. The next speaker is Bogdan Strojewski. 1.5 minutes. Take the floor, please.
Czy mamy prawo do optymizmu?
Thank you, President. Are we entitled to be optimistic? I don't think so. We must keep our feet on the ground. We need to look at earlier reports on the same issue and see how the votes broke down. We'll most likely have a similar state of affairs here. We'll adopt the report, we'll welcome progress. But the really important step is implementation. Here in our parliament, we are talking about three issues at the same time: common security and defence policy, after our experience of the Crimean War, the fight against terrorism. Secondly, we underscore the role of new technologies, our own defence research. We demonstrate that new technologies can improve our security in Europe. Thirdly, we talk about cooperation with NATO. We don't want to replace NATO, but there could be duplication. This could supplement our defence, and perhaps something else that I'm concerned about. Security policy is all too often equated with defence policy. Expenditure on security is not always on military.
Thank you, Mr. Strojewski. And next, Patrizia Toia, 1 minute.
Federica Mogherini.
I think Mrs. Mogherini can be satisfied, and we are as well, because the dream of Mr. Spinelli, a European defence policy, is finally in reach. Today, France is very pro-European, like Italy and many other countries. The UK is no longer an obstacle, and the United States have renounced their role of providing stability to the world. They're now doing the opposite. So the EU now has to show moral leadership and international diplomacy. We won the Nobel Prize in 2012 thanks to the excellent work of Mrs. Mogherini, and the desire that you've repeated again today, but which is very important for our group, to use our tools, including military power, for Europe, for our values. Defence ministers signing structured cooperation. We know that we have a long way to go, but we have won many battles and done so well. I'm also thinking of research for strategic independence of Europe. And I would just say that here we need to use our soft power for Africa, for Libya, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Toia. But you spoke a little bit too long. Let's try to stick to the speaking times. And now I give the floor to Jaromir Stetina. You have 1.5 minutes. Take the floor, please, Mr. Stetina.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome the creation of the PESCO, which was officially signed yesterday. I'm very glad that even my country, the Czech Republic, will be a part of this. For many years after approval of the Lisbon Agreement, we were sort of stuck in place. But because of the new conventional and hybrid threats, we needed to rethink our common strategy, and we needed to start acting. No single member state can deal with these very complex security issues that we're facing today. Therefore, I fully agree with the very clear and very ambitious statement in Mr. Gahler's report. Very clear in naming the threats, be it terrorism, the continuance of the war of Russia versus Ukraine, the militarization of the Crimea, or the nuclear threat of North Korea. And it is also very clear in terms of setting out the steps that we need to take in the future. It stresses a strengthening of the CSDP mandate missions. It stresses a reform of their financing, whereas a part of their mandate should in the future be a fight against terrorism and a de-radicalization program. We also need to further focus on more cooperation of these missions with Frontex and other agencies, which is essential to tackle cross-border people trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stetina. The next speaker is Jonas Fernandez. You have 1 minute. Take the floor, please.
Thank you, President. Today we're discussing two very important reports in defining the future of the Defence Union, And this is the day after 25 states of the EU agreed to permanent structured cooperation under Mrs. Mogherini, and thank you very much. It coincides with the Commission and Parliament's desire to move forward in the Defence Union, to invest more in research and to try to consolidate a single market which will strengthen our capacities in the EU Union. We're not saying that the EU is trying to be more military, quite the opposite. We have to be able to manage our defence policy together, and that's how we can reduce the amount of money we spend on defence, by being more efficient. We are also aware that defence is closely linked to security policy. Security and defence policies are not so distinct, and this is how we're working, and this is fundamental for the future of the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandes. The next speaker is Tunne Kelam. You have 1.5 minutes. Take the floor, please.
Puheenjohtaja, Madam Mogherini, these impressive and constructive reports are, first of all, about implementation. For that, our foreign policies need to be based on fundamental values, mainstreaming human rights and EU values in relations with third countries, making any progress in economic and political relations conditional to convincing improvement of partner countries' human rights record should be a key element of the CFSP. Thus, for example, striking this balance of that in current Iran and EU relations. Second, credible common policy means speaking with one voice and without delays. Our report concludes that current decision-making process in the EU Council is a main obstacle to effective and timely external EU action. Thus, that means that qualified majority voting should be applied also for common foreign, security and defence policies. And third, we call the EU institutions to enhance their ability to anticipate conflicts and rely more on long-term impact assessments of EU policies. This is especially relevant about hybrid warfare and disinformation. That means to turn STRATCOM task force into a full-fledged unit within the EEAS, giving it all necessary support. And finally, sanctions are part of the efficient EU policies. I propose that we should make these more efficient, targeting concrete individuals responsible for breaking international laws and human rights violations in the type of Magnitsky lists. Thank you very much.
Kiitokset, herra Kelam. Thank you, Mr. Kelam. The next speaker is Ana Gomes. 1 minute. You have the floor.
Well, finally, we have permanent structured cooperation with 25 member states on board, including my own. They have pledged to invest in defence, an area where the European Union needs to respond to its citizens' wishes. We can't defend ourselves alone when we have multinational threats emerging, when we have digital technology that forces us to invest in cybersecurity. We need to ensure the resilience of our infrastructure, and that we need to ensure that we can respond to hybrid warfare. We need to ensure the industrial base of European defence. We need to ensure that our taxpayers should be receiving an efficient value for money. We need to ensure that there is full respect for international legality in PESCO, in the common security and defence policy as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Gomez. The next speaker is Laima Andrikiene. 1.5 minutes. Take the floor, please.
Kolegos, gyvename įtemptų laikotarpiu, kuris išorės grėsmių.
Honourable members, we know that there are external threats, terrorism, instability in Africa. Russia and elsewhere. And so NATO is the best guarantor of peace in Europe. But the European Union must also bolster the capabilities of its own member states and invest accordingly, because we need to be able to deliver responses at an EU level. I'm pleased, indeed delighted, that 25 member states yesterday agreed on permanent structured cooperation, PESCO. We have managed to agree on the 7 pilot projects. Mrs. Mogherini, I'm delighted that we've taken this step. It's a sign that member states are willing to invest in increasing their defence capabilities. It is important to ensure genuine cooperation between the EU and NATO as well, working on cybersecurity, hybrid threats and strategic communication. These are all areas where we need cooperation. Defence, security, these are areas where the European Union must take its fate into its own hands. I would like to thank the 2 rapporteurs for their excellent work.
Thank you, Madam Andrikien. The next speaker is Arne Lietz. 1 minute. Take the floor, please.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, well, I think it's very regrettable that the report on the implementation of the common foreign and security policy only marginally touches upon the issue of arms exports. Mrs. Merkel has stated it quite clearly. She wants a harmonization of export criteria. Well, I think it's good that she raises the issue, but I hope that the already existing European export criteria will be kept to in Germany as well. We can't have a coherent defence policy if member states continue to export weapons to third countries in an uncoordinated manner. There are points that were not taken on board by the rapporteur, that at the moment it's up to the individual member states to decide where they export weapons to. The European Defence Fund, which is supposed to be financed by the European budget, has to be closely scrutinised by the European Parliament. There's a reflection document from the S&D group from November this year, and I would advise you to read it.
Thank you, Mr. Lietz. And the last speaker before the Catch the Eye is Žiliana Žovko. 1.5 minutes. Take the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Madam High Representative, I would like to congratulate colleagues McALLISTER and GAHLER on excellent reports which point to the importance of strengthening the common foreign security policy in the European Union. The current security challenges deriving from terrorist threats and immigration crisis, which raise tensions in the member states, call upon us to provide answers to our citizens. It is high time to improve coordinated capacities of the member states of the Union. The European Union must play a more proactive role in preventing conflicts at its borders, which may cause new waves of refugees and new instability in the future. If we want to strengthen our global role, the diplomacy of the European Union must show its strength in our closest neighborhood, for example in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where even after 22 years there is no way out of this Frankenstein of the state structure, which has led to various views of the past, and the future is still placed on hold. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Žovko. Now we can move to the Catch the Eye procedure, and I cannot give everyone the floor, but we do have some time. So the first speaker is Henna Virkkunen. You have the floor.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Madam President, the European defence politics have taken concrete steps forward this year, which is very positive and welcome. Europe should take more responsibility itself of its own defence. Without a doubt, we have many benefits we can have from this financially and when it comes to defense, we can better plan defense together by having more acquisitions together and by answering these challenges together. However, I would like to go to one question which is also mentioned in the Gahler report, and it is the Article 41.7 on common defense. We have not defined its content yet, and member states interpret it very different ways. The European Parliament 2 years ago already said that the Commission should start preparation where it defines clearly responsibilities, the processes and guidelines, how this article should be interpreted. I would now ask you, High Representative Mogherini, has the Commission started any actions on this? Because if we have to use this article, then we want to use this process in the same way, otherwise it would be very confusing because we don't have any ready model. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Virkkunen. Next speaker is Jean-Paul Denanot. 1 minute. Take the floor, please.
Thank you, President. High Representative, stability in the Middle East, poverty in Africa, the crazy behavior of a few dictators, rising terrorism, these are all threats that should make us think more about European defence. Donald Trump's stances in the US should also give us pause for thought. We need to re-examine our options. The European Union cannot allow itself to be defenceless. We may be pacifist by nature, but we don't live in a peaceful world, unfortunately. We need to harness all the potential of the Lisbon Treaty, permanent structured cooperation, which would be the first step towards a genuine European defence union. And cyber defence. 2 projects I'd like to underline: preparatory action on research and the pooling of military resources to make savings. We need to tap fresh funding rather than draining funds away from the European structural funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denanot. The next speaker is Arne Gerickel. 1 minute. Take the floor, please.
Madam President, High Representative, if you know me, I'm not a big fan of more Europe, but I want a Europe that delivers. That's why I welcome this European defence policy for peace, not just as an arms provider. I would like to expressly thank you for all of your technical input as well. PESCO now involves 25 of the 28 member states, and I very much welcome the priorities that have been identified: cybersecurity, training, and a joint emergency centre. For me, it's also very important that we should develop our technical possibilities for understanding across different languages. However, I'm a bit more critical when it comes to the headquarters in Brussels. We've already got command centres. We've got one in Neuruhm. They already carry out very good work. We should be bolstering these structures rather than creating new ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gericke. The next speaker is Mr. Javier Couso-Permuy. 1 minute. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. Permanent structured cooperation is being presented as the final end of European cooperation. It could be seen as a bluff, but you remember that in 1991 France, Germany, Spain and Belgium created another force, but it was never going to replace NATO. I'm not saying this. Other people have said it as well. We want to strengthen cooperation with NATO. As the High Representative said, we cooperate more than we ever have with NATO. The EU just repeats what NATO says like a parrot. We want military Schengen, military abilities to replace the function as NATO. We haven't seen more security with NATO. We're seeing more military expenditure. That means more arms. We can't just replace the military interests of those on the other side of the Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Kouso-Permoi. Next is Andrei Grip. 1 minute, you have the floor.
Dziękuję, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Since the last report, we've had 4 years of common security and defence policy, and I think that in the meantime that we have to ensure that we are not contradicting the measures being taken by NATO. I think that this also has to be well coordinated with each other. With all of the tensions in current politics, we need to avoid this simply being the lowest common denominator of our countries, that instead member states are largely been following their own interests. In the common foreign and security policy, the individual situations of the member states do have to be taken into account. There are differences between our countries. Not only the large companies should be benefiting from all of this, and I'd like to thank you very much for your efforts. In Article 22 you already have something to cover this.
Thank you, Mr. Grzyb. The next speaker is Kostas Mavrides. 1 minute, you have the floor.
Thank you. So, Ms. Mogherini, 25 member states co-signed this common declaration known as PESCO. We aim to have a more integrated cooperation at European level that will have European aims. The member states can keep their own defense and be able to work better through European cooperation, through synergies and saving money. That means that defense will be more effective and as a result foreign policy will be more effective. Of course, the EU faces dangers such as securing our external borders, energy security, terrorism and others. For all of these things we can cooperate and we can have results so that all of us will be better off. And to the colleagues that mentioned NATO, I would like to make a simple comparison. If member states cooperate within NATO, I am sure that they can cooperate within the EU as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mavrides. The next speaker is Mr. Luke Flanagan. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I think the tone is wrong here. I have to say this is a sad day as an Irish citizen. This was meant to be a peace project and now it is to become a never-ending military project. And you've said it yourself, Ms Mogherini, missions can only grow into the future. Will you be paying for them or will it be the ordinary people of Europe who can barely feed themselves who will be paying for it? It will be more cost, more resources, at a time in Ireland where we have record homelessness figures, where we have record hospital waiting lists. We then have a so-called socialist, an S&D member, suggesting that this should become the most ambitious project of the Union. What about food security? What about climate change? But no, the most important thing is military, weapons, guns and bombs. The language used by Jean-Claude Juncker was no better. He used the word beauty. What's beautiful about this? We should be spending the money on areas that need it, not on guns, on food, on housing and health, not on debt. Shame on ye.
I'm sorry, but such acclamations are not allowed, so please remember that. Moving on, we still have a few speakers under the catch-the-eye procedure. The next speaker is Mr. Andor Deli. You have the floor.
Köszönöm szépen, elnök asszony. Elégedettséggel állapítom meg, hogy a McALLISTER.
Thank you. I note that Mr. McAllister's report has a positive view of the Western Balkans and security of this region, and I would agree with the fact that security in the Western Balkans has to be a priority for the whole of the EU. EU integration can do a great deal to ensure security in the region, and I'm particularly happy to see in the report that the funds available should be from the Commission should be increased. It's not easy to justify the fact that the European Parliament is spending more on its shuttles between the headquarters of its institutions than it does on supporting Serbia in institutional reform.
Thank you, Mr. Deli. Next up, Tibor Zani. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. Political cooperation in the EU is such that all cooperation is democratic, and we need to guarantee democracy. The European Union has global values and wishes to share them. That is only possible if we are effective in the stance we take to champion European values and speak out against those that abuse them.
Thank you, Mr. Zani. And the last speaker on the catch-eye procedure is Mr. Tolic, Ivica Tolic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The security of the EU is the main precondition for development in all areas of European society. I want to congratulate Mr. McAllister and Mr. Galler and Mr. Danjean because they were quite good in their work on this file. Also, congratulations to Mrs. Mogherini, who is wise when it comes to advancing the security and defense policy. Setting up a good structural cooperation is really a good and important step forward. We also need to focus on the area of Western Balkans and make sure that these countries already now start following the EU's common foreign and security policy. It is also important for hard and soft power to come hand in hand, to go hand in hand, because now we were more prone to using soft power. Also, we have different defense capabilities among countries, but we need to improve interoperability and preparedness. After Brexit, the UK needs to remain in this project because it is in our common interest to defend the European territory. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we can move on. I give the floor to Madam High Representative Mogherini. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the rapporteurs, thanks to all of you. This is the result, I think, of a common work that needs now to be continued. So let me start by saying that I count on this common work to continue in the months and the years ahead. Some of you were asking if we can be optimistic today. I know that we're not used to that. I think it is about realism and pragmatism today more than optimism. Because to quote a great figure of last century and partially also of this one, Nelson Mandela, was saying, it always seems impossible until it's done. I think this is exactly the case where everybody was predicting this would have been impossible for different reasons. The work on the European defence, because the political conditions were not there, because of this and that. And we proved that political conditions can be created when there is determination and when there is the support of our citizens, because as some of you mentioned, I think it was David McAllister, our citizens strongly support our common work on the European Union level on security and defence and also on foreign policy. And this creates the political conditions for us to deliver on this that is a top priority for our citizens. I believe this has also been possible, and this will continue to be possible, which is even more important, because we decided at a certain moment to move from the theoretical, ideological approach and debate on the European defence and security work to a practical, useful, concrete approach of single actions that could improve our work on security and defence, delivering on the needs of our citizens. Let me say, and actually, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I will address most of the concerns and questions of members of parliament that are not there anymore, which probably mean that their concerns were not so urgent. But I know it's more difficult to work with facts and practical decisions to be taken rather than with stereotypes. But if you look at the facts, we are not talking about creating a European Union army. All the 25 member states that are launching the permanent structured cooperation are going to continue to keep their national forces, and they're going to continue to use their capabilities either in European Union missions and operations or in NATO, if they're NATO allies, or in UN peacekeeping missions, or in other ways. What we are doing is not a militarisation of... I'm used to the Italian Parliament, this is nothing. We are not working on a militarisation of our union. We are not turning our union, which is and stays a political union and a force of mixing hard and soft power, as most of you have remembered, we are not turning this into a militarisation approach. On the contrary, when I say our missions and operations will be even more needed in the months and the years to come, is exactly because the world needs more and more missions and operations like the European Union ones that are working for peace in a cooperative manner on the ground. This is what is required. This is a different approach, the European way, and this is what is needed in the world of today, the force for peace. That sometimes requires also the hard force, the military means, but always used at the service of peace. We are not, and we have not, weakened or duplicated or entered into competition with NATO. And when I say proudly, we have never worked so well and so much together with NATO in the fields where NATO doesn't have the instruments to work on some threats. And we have a useful cooperation with NATO as a military alliance. I find it a bit strange to hear that this would mean that the European Union would be, I'm not sure if it's a proper English word, but subaltern to the United States. The following two debates are going to be on the Iran nuclear deal and on Jerusalem. I have the impression that we are putting strategic autonomy quite in practice in these times, so maybe we might face the contrary problem down the road. But I think we have to get out of the pre-cooked ideological arguments sometimes we are used to use in the political debate and look at reality. Reality changes, and this reality has changed in the European Union, thanks also to the work of this Parliament and thanks to a lot of determination and sometimes stubbornness we have put in that. And last myth that we have to overcome, it's not about spending. How much member states spend on defence, it's up to national governments and national parliaments. It's not even up to this Parliament. But how these investments are done, if it's an efficient or not efficient way of investing, which means together or not together in a fragmented or in a coordinated manner, for example, investing in a European manner, buying in a European manner, again, strategic autonomy also in the field of industry, is a matter where the European Union can make the difference. So national decisions, but the European Union is the only one, and NATO and our American friends have understood it perfectly well, that can change the fundamental factor of spending better on the European Union side. Last 2 points, very concrete ones. One is to answer to Madame Ayou-Marie. I am doing already an annual report on CSDP. I would be very pleased to use this opportunity to the European Parliament to include a report on progress on this specific issue. I think it's going to be very useful to carry on the work in a practical, concrete and punctual manner, including on the resources that we will have to allocate in the future to sustain the ambitions we are defining. And very last point, Madam Chair, I'm sorry to raise this, but This is a debate about European foreign security and defence policy. It's about the comprehensive approach, bringing together different tools and instruments, and I believe the work of the Parliament is extremely valuable in this field, unique, I would say. I would have not made it without the work of the Parliament. It's a bit sad for me to see that in one afternoon this plenary has 8 points on the agenda on foreign policy. I think this is a fragmentation that is a waste of visibility and working capacity for the plenary itself. Obviously it's your autonomous choice, but if you could mainstream a bit the focus of foreign policy debates, I think this would be added value for the work of the Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam High Representative. Thank you, Madam Mogherini. Now I give the floor to both rapporteurs. First, Michèle GAHLER. 2 minutes, you have the floor.
Kiitoksia paljon, arvoisa puheenjohtaja, hyvät kollegat. I would like to thank the, not more, no, that was it, in Finnish. I would like to thank once again colleagues and a considerable majority in this House who support this policy on CFSP and PESCO, and I would like especially to thank also the High Representative, and sitting on the Council side, she has another head, the head of the European Defence Agency also, that she recognises and appreciates the contribution of the Parliament that we are where we are today. I think apart from that, it doesn't make sense to repeat wrong things. It doesn't make them more true. It is just to reiterate, it is not about, of course not about a militarisation of the EU. We are definitely not financing military operations out of our budget in future. We are definitely not buying tanks or aircraft or helicopters out of the EU budget in future. Rightly so, it remains with the national budgets and with the national governments and parliaments, but we have to become more efficient. This exercise is primarily also a more efficiency exercise, because if we plan together, if we procure together, if we train together, that makes us more efficient in the tasks ahead. And I sometimes wonder, some colleagues from the fringes, from the periphery, for instance in Greece, both the very right wing and the very left wing, I wonder, when they identify Mr. Erdogan as one of their major enemies, well, in NATO he could block everything. If we had to rely on NATO, any veto from any member state would definitely block our access to NATO resources. We need a certain amount of strategic and operational autonomy as EU in order to be able to do what we deem appropriate. And insofar as the world does unfortunately not only exist of stable democracies, we need also this tool within our foreign policy instruments that we are establishing here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. GAHLER. Your Finnish skills always impress me. Then the next rapporteur, David McAllister. 2 minutes, you have the floor.
Madam President, everything has been said. So, in the end, I would just like to thank all colleagues in the House, especially those who are still present, for an open and honest debate. Thanks for your criticism. Thanks for your positive remarks. And instead of summing up the debate, which is impossible anyhow in 2 minutes, I prefer to cite the EU Treaty. Dear Federica Mogherini, I would like to thank you, pursuant to Article 36, first sentence of our treaty, for consulting the European Parliament on the main aspects and the basic choices of the CFSP and CSDP, and informing it of how those policies evolve. And I would like to also thank you in advance for Article 36, second sentence, ensuring that the views of the European Parliament are duly taken into consideration. I think this was a very fruitful debate. Hopefully we'll have good votes on our reports tomorrow. And a final remark. The High Representative just pointed out correctly that we are debating 7 foreign policy issues, or even 8, 8 foreign policy issues in a row here in the plenary. This is decided by the Conference of Presidents, and I would like to ask all you colleagues to address this in your political groups, that we can avoid this for the future. And in the meantime, we should all bring forward the good arguments we once again heard from the High Representative, but it is up to us to make this clear to the Conference of Presidents that we can organise this Parliament better than we are doing in the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. And this ends our debate on this topic, and we will vote on this tomorrow. Then I have an announcement. I will do it in English.
Kollegat, in relation to the recommendation by the Economic Committee not to raise objection to the delegation regulation announced at the opening of yesterday's sitting, no objections have been raised within the